Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Um, I'd like to share a little bit about my master's thesis research, focusing on how the knowledge and observations of the local community and harvesters of seaweed is actually very important in helping to create policies for sustainable seaweed fisheries in Iceland. My research focuses on how a coastal community is connected to a specific type of seaweed. This is rockweed. You can find it growing around in the intertidal areas in the coast of Iceland. And just like plants, rockweed has the ability to grow back after cutting. And just like forests, it's a place where animals live, feed, and hide from predators. Right now, it is mostly used for producing a material called alginate. It is a gelling agent that you can find in ice cream, soups, cosmetics, fire retardant. In Iceland, it is mostly harvested and exported as organic animal feed. And around the world, there is an increasing demand for seaweed products. And this is Iceland. Most of the seaweed is harvested in the west by a community, for a local community that depends on the resource. And before 2018, there was no policy to guide the development of seaweed fisheries. However, because of the growing demand, policy is needed to help protect the environment and guide sustainable development. So as a first step to figure out, to develop a policy, the government and scientists need to know how much of seaweed is available in the area. So with satellite imagery and ground truthing, about 1 million tons of seaweed is found in the area. Oopsies. I think my PowerPoint has quit, but I will call it out again.
Jamie, you're no longer sharing your screen, so you'll have to hit the share screen again as well when you get your PowerPoint back up.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. It's back. Thank you.
Yay. Okay, so to recap, so first step to make policy, the government and scientists need to know how much biomass there is in the area. And with satellite imagery and ground truthing, they found more than 1 million tons of seaweed in the West. And to give some context, it's about the weight of 10,000 blue whales. However, according to the local community and the harvesters, only 2% of that is harvestable. And if more catch is allowed than available, then it could lead to overharvesting and damaging the environment. So why is it so limited, you may wonder? In order to explain to me what they have learned over the years of working with the seaweed, the harvesters brought me on a few harvesting trips and showed me a few things. And first of all, they told me that not all seaweed grow the same everywhere. On average, it takes about 4 years to recover from after harvesting, but in some areas it could take up till 10 years. And this is related to the availability of light and the temperature every year. And second is that not all the seaweed is accessible. The sea bottom in this area is very rugged with about 3,000 islands. Some areas have strong waves, and along with the tidal flow, the seaweed vessels can get grounded easily. And then third, in winter, the sea ice can build up a thickness and completely shave off the seaweed from the area. And this would greatly reduce the amount of seaweed that is available for harvest. And fourth is that there are other species that are related to the seaweed, that use seaweed, and they are part of the livelihood of other local communities. For example, rockweed provide a habitat and food for common eider ducklings, and the eider ducks in return provide feathers for the coastal communities to harvest when they decide to nest on the land. So some landowners may close part of their land to seaweed harvesting to protect the habitats. And so all of the above have been documented by the local communities and the harvesters to decide on every year on how, when, and where they can harvest. And so since policy can affect the development of seaweed fisheries, and the local community really depend on the resource, it is important for policy to consider the impact on local communities and also keep them connected to the resource. And this really highlights that it is important not to only consult and learn from the locals while developing the policy, but there is a strong need in science and the local community to continuously collaborate and produce knowledge together and continue the exchange in order to make sure that the seaweed and the environment stays healthy. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Amy, I'm sure you're saying something profound, but we can't hear it.
Well, Sarah, I'm not sure if it was profound, but I definitely was muted, so thank you very much for that. Jamie, thanks very much, and thanks for taking on the lightning style in such a good way. Does anybody have questions for Jamie? Jamie, let me start off with one. So I thought it was really great that you were talking about how much is harvestable, because there's a lot of effort going on in Alaska with regard to seaweed aquaculture and figuring out just how much it can be harvested, and exactly what you said about different types of seaweed having different recovery times. How much have you looked at other kind of compared between your work and maybe other places in the world to kind of see, have you found a lot of literature or other people doing this that you've leaned off of in this work, or is it primarily what you're learning there with your colleagues?
Yes, I have found I found some literature, but because seaweed is quite specific to locality, I found a lot of literature from Canada. It seems like they have been using co-management and doing test pilot plants to see how much of the seaweed can be harvested from the wild. I haven't looked much into the aquaculture aspect, but it seems like most of the supply in the world is from aquaculture.
Thanks, Jamie. And we have a couple questions in the chat box, and I'll read it. First is, thank you, Jamie. My question is whether anyone is farming seaweeds in the areas you studied.
Yes, but they are very small local operations, mostly sort of as it's more of someone who was trying to raise mussels and found that the seaweed has caught onto the lines as a fouling agent, and then started utilizing the seaweed as well. And I think there are some small budding projects that are interested in looking into how to grow them, but nothing that I can really give details about.
All right, thanks. And Elizabeth had a follow-up question, and that is, how many people are harvesting seaweed in the region of your study, and how many people did you speak with?
So in this region I did my research on, there's only one company that is harvesting the seaweed, and it's a team of 6 people, and there are locals that have been living in municipality of about 282 people. I have spoken to about 22. I also did some survey, and I did surveys with 22 people randomly.
Great. I know one of the interesting things, our Alaska Fisheries Science Center is doing a lot of work around Kodiak Island, and if you maybe turn Kodiak upside down, it may look as craggly and this and that as Iceland. But one of the things that they are particularly looking at is the potential for ocean acidification and how it might impact kelp farming. Are there any of those concerns in Iceland?
Acidification and seaweed. Yes, there is one research scientist from the Marine Research Institute. She's looking in those two topics of how much carbon dioxide may be given off by kelp when over the long winters or dark days, and how that may affect acidification in the area.
Thanks for that. Does anybody else have questions for Jamie?
I am very interested actually to hear about today's presentation on about the important lessons learned and about the obstacles and tips to overcome how to co-produce knowledge with the local community.
Super. Well, thanks, Jamie. And you're getting a lot of thank yous on the GChat, so make sure to take a look at those. And with that lovely transition, Andy, start unmuting because you're up next, and we're really excited to hear what you and Cyrus have to share with us today.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Amy. I guess let me know when you want me to start sharing my screen. If you want me to do that, I can do that right now, I think.
You're getting the nod from Sarah, so go ahead, Andy.
All right, so you guys.
And as he's doing that, everyone, please feel free to use the group chat box in the Zoom program here. It's a great way to let us all see your questions and your comments and information sharing. Back to you, Andy.
Hey, thanks, Amy. So can everyone see my title slide, Bridging the Scientific and Indigenous Communities to Study Sea Ice Change in Arctic Alaska?
Yes, we can.
Seeing some nods, so I'll take that as I can. And Cyrus and Alex in Kotzebue, can you guys hear me okay so that I can pass off to you throughout the talk?
Signal. Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, great. So good morning, afternoon, or evening.
I forgot we got to unplug.
We lost him.
See Amy's hand saying stop.
Sorry, I'm gonna mute Alex, and I just am having some trouble doing that. Where we go? Sorry. There we go. Sorry.
Okay, I'll start again then, seeing the thumbs up from Amy. So I'm Andy Mahoney. I'm a geophysicist at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. My specialty area of expertise is sea ice. And I'm part of a large team, and you can see a number of those team members listed on the title slide. And we're part of a project that is novel in many ways for our efforts to combine indigenous knowledge with state-of-the-art scientific approaches to look at sea ice change in Arctic Alaska and the impacts that it has on coastal communities. In this case, specifically the community of Kotzebue. Now, I'm no expert on coastal resilience, though the vast majority of my research has been the study of sea ice in the Arctic and Antarctic coastal systems. You can see there's a number of universities represented in our research team, and we have strong membership and participation from the native village of Kotzebue, and we have Alex Whiting and Cyrus Harris on this call as well. And I'm going to hand off to them for further input as we go through the talk. I'm sure most people here know where Kotzebue is, but I always like to start with a map anyway. So here's the community of Kotzebue, kind of put in perspective where it is, sitting north of the Bering Straits. It's sort of adjacent to the southern Chukchi Sea, inside the shelter of Kotzebue Sound, sheltered somewhat from the winds and ocean processes that take place in the sort of outside in the southern Chukchi Sea, but also strongly influenced by the terrestrial hydrology with two quite large rivers, the Kobuk and the Noatak, flowing out into Kotzebue Sound, immediately adjacent to the community. I'm going to go through, I'm going to introduce our project, explain really, so I think what makes our project different from others, and then give a real quick overview of the questions that we're trying to address and the results, very brief results from our first season of field measurements. So the Iqaluit Sukukun project, oh, I need to update the logo a little bit on this slide, I just realized, but it's a partnership between an Indigenous expert advisory council and scientists and researchers from Columbia University, University of Alaska Fairbanks, as well as we have a documentary filmmaker, Sarah Betcher from Farthest North Films, who many of you might know. And we're also partnering with Latitude Engineering, who are providing us with some cutting-edge, state-of-the-art drones, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. I put the Expert Advisory Council right at the top of this because they really do have an overarching role in our project. We try to sort of run any large decisions through them, and in particular, making sure that we're trying to ask the right questions. I'll go through the process that we use to do that in a little bit. But before I go further, I would just like to see if Cyrus or Alex have anything to comment at this point. Are you guys unmuted?
Good morning. Yeah, you've mentioned it very well there, Andy. And then having the Indigenous Expert Advisory Council involved with this project really helped out both ways. It's a great way of introducing ecological knowledge and science research. Alex, do you have anything?
Well, this project is sort of in the same arena that the native village of Kotzebue has been undertaking sort of since I came on in '97, and that's the approach of combining Indigenous knowledge with scientific knowledge and Indigenous peoples with scientists, and working collaboratively to have exponential understandings of the environment and answering some of the points of interest and questions that the community has. And so this is just one of the bigger projects in that, but it's in that same vein, though. That's something that Native Village of Kotzebue has been trying to develop and sort of lead in this part of the Arctic, is to demonstrate how that approach is sort of the best approach, and it's been really good. This project has been really good at doing that. That's all.
Hey, thanks, Cyrus and Alex. So too much of an introduction to the Kotzebue region, but it's the town itself is an Inupiat community of something just over 3,000 people, situated on a peninsula of land that lies within Kotzebue Sound, which itself is a pretty large, shallow area that is influenced by sea ice and two fairly large rivers. It's a habitat for ringed seal and bearded seal, both of which are important subsistence species for hunters such as Cyrus and the other members of our advisory committee. And it's also adjacent to the southern Chukchi Sea, which is where we've seen perhaps some of the largest and fastest rates of change anywhere in the Arctic. The sea ice loss in the Pacific Arctic in particular has been very pronounced in the southern Chukchi Sea. So I think scientifically it's an excellent place to try and understand the processes that are taking place as we transition toward an increasingly seasonal ice state in the Northern Hemisphere, whilst at the same time being able to address questions that are relevant to the community in the face of these changes. Our approach involves, as I mentioned, some state-of-the-art drone technology. In particular, we're using an HQ-90 hybrid quad-rotor unmanned aerial system capable of carrying 15 to 20 pounds of science payload. As you can see in this video, it does vertical takeoff and landing, making it a very versatile platform. And we should be able to get up to 20 hours of endurance, but actually so far, operating in the slightly colder conditions in Kotzebue, we haven't quite been able to achieve that. It also has a modular payload system, the idea being that for multiple different questions, for different types of science operation, we can just plug and play different nose cones on the front to put in different types of science instrument, and you can see we've got lots and lots of different instruments that we can plug in there for doing everything from identifying marine mammals on the sea ice, mapping the color of the ocean and the sea ice in multispectral space, and measuring surface temperature of the sea ice and ocean for understanding melt processes, and a wide range of other missions. In addition to the drone measurements, we've also been doing a lot of work on the sea ice itself and under the sea ice. We've actually have a mooring sitting out at the mouth of Kotzebue Sound that's measuring ocean currents and ice thickness and temperature, and that was put in last year. We'll be recovering it shortly to see what data it was able to collect over the course of winter. We set up Kotzebue's first ice thickness measurement program, allowing us to actually look at what the seasonal growth and melt of sea ice looks like in Kotzebue Sound, producing a baseline from which we'll be able to study further change, and also understand what are the processes that drive sea ice growth and melt in Kotzebue Sound, and is that different from what we see outside. That this sort of knowledge will allow us to understand how Kotzebue will respond to the processes taking place in the broader Arctic. But fundamentally, it's a community-based research design. What I just showed you there, drones, in situ measurements, that's something that's common to a lot of different science projects, but what I think really makes our project different is the level and depth of community involvement. Again, here, community engagement is at the top of the diagram, because that's really where we've tried to start. We actually spent our first year working with our advisory council, Cyrus and Ross and Bobby and John, trying to identify what our research questions should be, how we can identify the questions that are most important to the local community, and what Indigenous knowledge already tells us about those questions. So essentially, we can even find out what questions we should be asking before we try and come up with themselves. So this is actually involving Indigenous knowledge at the hypothesis development of science. And I think that's an important step. It's one that communities have been asking for a long time. And in my knowledge, it's a fairly novel approach in the earth sciences. You can see there's multiple components to our project, community engagement being one of them. We're very much an observational project, flying unmanned aircraft, going out on the sea ice, putting in year-round observations based at the community itself. And then we've got a number of different research questions that initially, when I put this slide together, we just had very general topics that we thought we might be interested in. And that was before we got down and worked with the community to nail down some hypotheses and research questions. So Jamie did a great job of describing the importance of including local knowledge, and in the case of Kotzebue, Indigenous knowledge in the scientific process. And this is sort of one of my favorite examples of the value of doing that. I'm going to let Ross Schaefer speak for himself here. Now, the audio on this video is not particularly loud, so you guys might want to turn the volume way up on your computers or your phone so that you can hear this.
One of the interesting things that I observed when I was on the Public Whale Committee was that we did some interviews with people from Elam, Koyo, and Shaktuli. And in the interviewer was confused. People there were talking about belugas, and all of a sudden they're talking about beavers. And they, wait a minute, you guys are talking about beavers. Well, what are they got to do with the belugas? He said, the Eskimos told me that what's happening with the beavers, once they get populated, they dam all the lakes. So the whitefish have to move someplace else. And so they displace that food source. So the belugas move somewhere else. That was the connection. And now when you look at Kotzebue and Buckland Bay, and Erie, all our areas are contaminated. There's no safe water because the beavers are everywhere.
So hopefully you could all hear that. The key quote there is in text on the screen. And this subject came up because I asked Ross about the possible relationship between the changes in CS that have been taking place in Kotzebue Sound and the changes in beluga presence. They used to be make an annual appearance, and now they're not there every year, and from what I understand, not nearly in the numbers that they used to be. So I brought this up to Ross, and he, I think, had a little chuckle and told me this story about how belugas may be just as influenced by beaver as they might be by sea ice. And so this is, I think, to me, really demonstrates the importance of including Indigenous knowledge early on in the research question development stage of research design. Because coming in from the outside, I may not even be asking the right questions. I don't even know what questions I should be asking. And so this is, I think, a really nice example. It encapsulates that and demonstrates it very well. And so we've tried to follow that approach. And to give you an idea what that approach looks like, we've got another very short documentary produced by Sarah Betcher based on our first year of visiting the community, working with our advisory council to make sure that we are trying to do our best to ask the right questions. So there is some music that plays quietly in the background in this, but really I'm just going to try and narrate it as we go. So this was flying into Kotzebue. You can see it's a small coastal community. And this is what community-based research design looks like. And literally, we started with a blank whiteboard. And we met with our advisory council, both individually and as groups. We used maps as a really good starting point for discussions. And fairly quickly, as you can see, we actually started filling our whiteboard with diagrams and more importantly, research questions. What are the questions that really get at the heart of understanding the impacts of a changing COS on a community like Kotzebue, and tying together all the different aspects of environmental change, habitat change, wildlife change, and how that affects the users of that wildlife from a subsistence standpoint. I think, as you can see, this was a very enjoyable. You can see most of us are grinning most of the time through this, through these interactions. It was just such an amazing educational experience to be able to tap into this depth of expertise and knowledge. And while I'm not saying we have anywhere close to the amount of knowledge that Cyrus and Ross and Bobby and John have, I think this approach allowed us to get up to speed very quickly and sort of fast track something that would take you a very long time if you came to the community and tried to do your research without the benefit of this Indigenous knowledge. So here you can see the drone that we were using. We thought it was really important to not just come and listen to our advisory council, but to be able to demonstrate to people, okay, this is what we've got. These are the tools, equipment, and let's be honest, toys that we have to play with. What would you do with these if you had them at your disposal? So we had a really productive time working with the community, and we learned about storytelling too, and the value of storytelling not only in learning, but also in sharing your data and your findings. And obviously, we've already produced a short documentary about that, and that was sort of a lesson we learned pretty early on, that we're going to make a video documentary of our whole project, and that will probably be one of our key ways that we're going to be able to explain our findings to the community of Kotzebue and the broader world out there. It's not just a matter of publishing in papers. We're also trying to tell our story in a way that's more in line with traditional oral traditions. So as a result of that, we came up with 6 primary research questions, which ended up starting with the number 0 because we decided in the end that that was the first question we should start with. As you can see, we were primarily a sea ice project, but we knew from the beginning that you can't talk about sea ice without talking about rivers, without talking about seals and seabirds. So every one of these questions touches on sea ice, but none of them directly address only sea ice physical processes. In order to answer these questions, there's a number of different aspects from which or a number of different angles from which you have to come, and separate questions you have to be able to answer in order to get the complete picture and answer some of these questions. Alex and Cyrus, is there anything you want to add at this stage about the process that we went through to come up with these questions?
Thank you, Andy. No, I don't have any at this time, but here shortly.
All right. Okay, so to move on, our first question, or question 0, this was really something that came up consistently when we tried to sort of tease out, okay, what would you do if you had a drone that could fly, far offshore and look at the sea ice and the marine mammals in the ocean underneath it as it flew? What questions would you ask? And one that came up when we met with Ross and John and Bobby and Cyrus individually and as a group was, what marine mammals are out in the sea ice in the southern Chukchi Sea before they come into Kotzebue Sound? So the species that they see in Kotzebue Sound, are they all loitering out there waiting to come in? Are there species out there that could come in but don't? And are there invasive species that are new to the environment coming up through that they don't see at that time of year when they're in Kotzebue Sound? Because until the fast ice in Kotzebue Sound breaks up, you can't launch a boat and get out into the waters offshore. And nowadays, the fast ice itself is becoming increasingly hazardous to travel far out on. And so this is a time of year when not a lot of people from the community really get out and see what's happening out there in the southern Chukchi Sea beyond the waters of Kotzebue Sound. In order to be able to answer this question, we have to understand what the ice dynamics are doing, how open water is created and closed in that area, and how different marine species are able to exploit the open water or the ice conditions. So as you can see, it's a sea ice question, or it addresses topics related to sea ice, but we have to bring in an awful lot of other knowledge in order to be able to answer it. Similarly, the next question on our list, what environmental factors control marine mammal use of Kotzebue Sound? Here we have to understand the natural histories of a number of different species that are seen in Kotzebue Sound, and understand the sequence of events that takes place as the sea ice starts breaking up, melting, and drifting away. So we need to know a lot of processes that are actually quite specific to Kotzebue. You can't look at these processes out in the central Chukchi Sea or in other parts of the Arctic. You have to come to Kotzebue in order to be able to answer these questions. And so the last question I'd like to go into in detail here, what environmental factors control the length of the bearded seal hunting season in Kotzebue Sound? So again, a question very much related to community interests, but it involves tying together an understanding of the growth, melt, and breakup processes of sea ice. It involves understanding how marine mammals use sea ice, and it involves understanding how hunters are able to navigate ice-covered waters. What does it take in order for hunters to be able to launch their boats from the coast? What sea ice changes have to take place to allow the fast ice to break up sufficiently to where it's safe to be able to go out from Kotzebue Sound, from the village of Kotzebue into the Sound in your boat. So there's a lot of physics and biology and human activities that we need to be able to understand in order to answer this question. So I'll pause again and check in with Cyrus and Alec to see if they have anything to add.
Good morning. Yeah, Andy, this spring after you guys left here, that very ice that you were getting samples out of Sisolik, it was a high productive area for our sea mammals, such as the nutchuck and the ugruk. So everywhere else was ice free, except for that shore fast ice that we're doing some studies on. So that was very productive, but just to get there was a whole lot different than before, other than taking off the shore with our outboard motors. I had to fly to Anigak, to where my 18-foot boat was, and hunt on the north side of Sisolik, and use four-wheelers to transport to our processing area. So that was early hunting. This year was somewhat unusual. I mean, you'll look at the presentation that Andy is going to be showing here pretty soon, or on our ice conditions that we've encountered this past spring. So the fair amount of ugruk that did get harvested were mostly from toward the Elephant Point Bay, and a few right there on the Sisolik Sound, or in front of Sisolik, sorry.
Oh, great, Cyrus! It's so good to get an update since we left Kotzebue, how the ice conditions in your hunting changed after we left. So, as Cyrus indicated, this year was a pretty unusual year for sea ice in Kotzebue Sound. Here's a grid of 19 years worth of ice conditions on April 19. I chose that date just because it seemed to be a cloud-free day on most years. And you can really see how 2018 stands out from all the others. Substantially less sea ice in both the southern Chukchi Sea and in particular in Kotzebue Sound at that time. So whereas we arrived shortly after, we arrived on the 25th of April, I believe, expecting the Sound to be largely covered with fast ice and being able to watch that fast ice break up. We ended up with just a very narrow area of fast ice to try and observe, and a Sound that was already primarily open water. As I mentioned, we arrived on April 25th, stayed for about a month until May 22nd or 3rd, I think. And during that time, we carried out a fairly extensive campaign of on-ice measurements and aerial surveys with drones. Now, unfortunately, the FAA were not able to process our request to be able to fly our drones beyond line of sight. And so that obviously restricted our flight range significantly. We had to maintain visual line of sight with the drones at all time. So we had to have an observer within approximately 1 mile of the drone as we flew it. And that obviously limited where we could access. We could run up and down the coast quite easily. We could get out to Sisolik, which is what's labeled as the seal habitat survey area, up to the northeast of the community of Kotzebue that Cyrus just mentioned. But the FAA restrictions unfortunately did limit what we were able to achieve. But nonetheless, with our on-ice measurements, which we traveled over the sea ice using snow machine, and the drone measurements, we've been able to get a pretty extensive data set showing the growth and melt of sea ice in this region during what is an exceptional year. So I think that's going to be some very interesting data to look at. We've been able to measure snow depth in different regions that we identified as seal habitat, and watch that snow depth change during what was a very unusual year for snow. Although the ice was very limited this year, there was a lot of snow on the ice. And that's going to be really interesting to look at how that may have affected seal habitat selection, and then impacts through possible flooding of the sea ice due to the overburden, the weight of the snow sitting on top of it. And we were able to confirm that our drone data are able to identify marine mammals sitting on the ice. So although we weren't able to survey an extensive area this year, we do have very detailed study of the region next to the coast. And as Cyrus mentioned, a region that ended up being a productive area for subsistence harvesting of seals. So the 2018 campaign wrapped up just over a month ago. Actually, no, exactly a month ago. And we're still working through all the data, and we'll be sure to work with our advisory council, Cyrus, Ross, Bobby, and John, as we start analyzing those data. So just to wrap up, I think we've found indisputably that there is tremendous value in engaging with the community at the earliest possible stages. Now, not all science funding agencies are going to be willing to fund a project that doesn't have any hypotheses. We were very fortunate to receive money from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation with only a very loose set of research questions, just to sort of give them an idea of what it was we wanted to look at. They were willing to, what at that time seemed like a bit of a risk, to fund a substantial project that didn't have well-defined hypotheses. But I think through our first year, we were able to come up with some very meaningful and targeted research questions in a far more quick and efficient way than had we, as a group of researchers unfamiliar with the Kotzebue region. If we just got together, we would have probably had to conduct a few preliminary pilot studies before we were able to come up with anything meaningful. I think we were able to fast track that approach through working with our Indigenous knowledge holders. And in that way, I think we can really look at lifetime hunters like Cyrus, not just as a knowledge holder, but a knowledge enabler. Bringing together and sharing that knowledge with scientific knowledge allows us to ask questions that we would never have even known to ask to begin with. And lastly, and this echoes, I think, the point that Jamie concluded on, co-produced knowledge is an iterative process. It's continuous and ongoing. We must share our knowledge both with our partners and with the broader scientific community, and really think about what story the data tell. And I think working with Indigenous experts is really helping us hone our storytelling abilities, because there's certainly more than one way to share scientific results, and I think telling stories with your data is a very powerful way to do that. So with that, I think that's all I have to say at this point, and I'd like to open it up for perhaps first Cyrus and Alex if they have anything else to add, and then any questions that anyone might have.
Well, thanks for including us on this presentation. This is very interesting to see the work that we've done, and with your participation coming up this way, also with Alex with the Native Village of Kotzebue. It's a win-win situation getting us all together in on this, and we'll be looking for any future project works.
Thanks, Cyrus. Really looking forward to sharing all our findings and updates from you guys up there in Kotzebue and from us as we start to put our data into a more shareable form. So are there any other questions from the worldwide audience?
It's
Andy?
for...
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Sarah. It's for both Andy and Cyrus. I'm interested to know, are there any challenges that stood out during the process of coming up with hypotheses and collaborating together? And how did you overcome it, if there were any?
I think one of the biggest challenges coming into a community as a researcher is finding the right people to talk to. And here, I think I have to give full credit to Alex, who over his decades of working with scientists was able to put our research team in contact with Cyrus and John and Bobby and Ross, and put that network together. So I think there were challenges, but Alex made them all look pretty easy.
That's a good question there, and I thought everything went smoothly with our participation with the Native Village of Kotzebue and the tribal consultation that took place well early on, and so the planning began years before. I had the opportunity to go out with Andy in 2016, so I was familiar with what they were looking for. And it made it easier for myself, to be there as their guide, and then went out and do some work in some interesting locations. My thought process into the question would be was the ice conditions that we had to go toward. We were just not able to go as far as we like. We went to within the shore fast ice, and did some work around that area. Great question, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I should add that we have one more field season left next year in our current round of funding. So even though we weren't able to get as far as we would have liked this year, we learned a lot of lessons, and we'll be coming back at the same time next year for what will hopefully be a more extensive survey that will allow us to answer more of those questions that we identified.
Andy, I have a question. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, thanks, Amy. So I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned that the tremendous value you got in the really formative stages of the research from the community, but that not all funding agencies are willing to fund before you have a kind of a really good set of questions to ask. Do you think that this as a test case, this as a model for this type of collaboration might serve as a opening for agencies to consider this type of engagement and with a looser set of hypotheses to be making a consideration, or is that just a leap that's a little too hard to make?
I think that's something that will just, only time will tell, but that's definitely something we're hoping for, and we're actually trying to see what we can do to sort of formalize exactly what it is that we've done, so that we can actually present that, as a scientific paper. And I think in that regard, it's actually quite a profound paper, because it really gets at the process of hypothesis making, something that really is the foundation of all scientific research. So it's somewhat daunting to think about writing an article on a subject as lofty as that, but I think we're actually in a very good position to do something. And perhaps through our project, the project and our results itself, and then if we're able to sort of describe exactly what we did in a way that others can follow, I think we could have a profound impact on, in particular, Arctic research.
Thank you.
And Andy, this is Amy. You have another question from the chat. And some Will asks, Andy, do you anticipate FAA clearance to work further offshore?
Yeah, we certainly do. We've had positive responses so far from the FAA with all our inquiries, but I think it's just a process that takes more time than we were allowed in order to be able to get the approval before our first field season. But this is actually something that the FAA wants to do. They want to be able to work out how to open up airspace to unmanned systems. It's something that's in the national interest, but obviously they want to be cautious with how they do that.
Andy, as a follow-up, did you get any question? How did you kind of put the word out about where you would be flying? And did you, granted it was winter, but did you have any questions from anybody who saw this bird flying over their heads and go, what's that?
That's actually a really good question, Amy, because that was during our first visits to the community to meet with our advisory council and develop research questions. We also took that opportunity to basically have face-to-face chats with all of the local fixed base operators in the Kotzebue area, so we could explain to them, basically a year ahead of time, what we were planning to do, try and answer any questions that they had immediately at that point. So that when we sort of made our formal announcement of what we were doing through issuing a notice to airmen through flight services in Kotzebue, they were already somewhat aware of what we were doing. The airport manager was already on board. So in a way, it was that process was very much in parallel with our work with the community, being very upfront, explaining who we are, what we wanted to do.
Thanks. Olivia Lee asked, were there any community concerns about the drones flying overhead over the ice and seals?
We didn't hear any concerns relayed to us, and here actually I would defer to Cyrus and Alex, but we did sort of take care to avoid potential conflicts, basically through our choice of when we came to do our research project, to minimize any impact on subsistence activities. We kind of tried to get there before they started. And Alex and Cyrus, please add to that if you have anything.
During the time the drones were out in the location, there was really no hunting activity in that area. Ice was, we still had shore fast ice along our the Kotzebue coast, and so the folks were just unable to get out there. So these areas that we have went out to, both on the south side of Kotzebue and the Sisolik area that we did some research, we're the only folks that did ventured out that area. Those are traditional stomping grounds for heading out to the leads on a normal winter, but much further out towards Sealing Point. But just near shore areas is where we headed out to, and there was no activity, no boats out there. We're the only snow machines.
I would also add that that's one of the benefits of having the local advisory group and the community involvement is that those activities are not something you can plan on avoiding, but you have to avoid in real time. And by having that intimate involvement of the group that we did, our plan was to utilize that to adjust as needed. Of course, with the line of sight limitations, that wasn't so much an issue this year, but I just want to point out that's the other bonus of having the intimate involvement of the community and the daily activities of the project.
Thanks, Alex. All right, I don't see any other questions coming in right now. Does anybody online have something they'd like to ask? Andy, Cyrus, and Alex, do you have any questions for anybody in the group?
I would actually be interested in learning more about sea ice in Iceland. I don't know much about it, but I'm intrigued that it has an impact on community activities and seaweed harvesting out there. That's perhaps something Jamie and I could follow up on later.
For sure. Yeah, I'd love to.
Great, and I know, Andy, one of the things we at NOAA can follow up with you on is whether there's any of our new polar capabilities that can aid into your remote sensing.
Sure, thanks. Yeah.
Well, Sarah, I think this has been a really interesting sharing of information. Maybe I'll give Andy, Cyrus, and Alex one more opportunity. If you want to leave us with one thought as we move forward, and one thing that you would like us to share, maybe re-emphasizing something in your summary or something that just comes to your head right now. Is there any words from the wise of how we ought to keep moving forward as we seek to work more collaboratively and do more co-production between our communities and our Western scientists?
I would only just add that this is the first time I've really had the opportunity to work with Indigenous experts at the hypothesis development stage, and it's been everything that I'd hoped for. I'm very excited to continue this and do the best we can with this excellent start.
Thanks, Andy. Cyrus, Alex?
One of the things to stress anyways is when scientists work with the local communities, especially when the local communities are involved with studying the field activities and on things like safety and whatnot. It's really important for Western scientists to be able to set aside their egos and whatnot and defer to the local people, and that makes everything go a little bit smoother and also better, I guess, and safer. And so that's always one of the biggest challenges we have over the years working with Western scientists in the community is their stated goal of letting the communities work or direct activities, as it were, and the scientists are used to sort of having control, and they have a hard time giving up some of that control. And so that's sort of just for the the audience anyways when it comes to successfully working with local communities is Western scientists. When they've committed to having Indigenous people directly involved in directing activities, they things go better when they're able to practice, I guess, what they preach, as it were.
Cyrus, anything you'd like to add?
Cyrus, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak on the ending portion of this presentation here. Well, I'd like to mention that ice conditions have been studies for, for time immemorial. So it was a very great survival tool for the coastal communities. Very important to study the very first forming of the ice in September, all the way up until it's time to be traveling on and when to be off of it. We just don't have our PhDs, but in memory. Thank you. Bye.